I know that you calling and hanging up.
Why? I ain't be calling hanging up, baby. You know I love your mama.
Hey, you got some money?
What? Some, huh?
I'm getting fine by the day, baby. What you waiting on?
Old Rashawn Wallace has been arrested in connection to a shooting that left one man dead. Now, the shooting happened around 11 this morning in the 5300 block of Brook Hollow Drive. Now, 33-year-old Damian Reed was pronounced dead on the scene. Wallace is being charged with murder. Now, this is still an open investigation, so if you have any information on this crime, you are asked to call Crime Stoppers or JPD.
What started as a peaceful Sunday morning in Jackson, Mississippi, turned deadly when a domestic dispute spiraled into a fatal shooting. On February 23, 2025, 30-year-old Rashawn Wallace, a licensed practical nurse, allegedly shot and killed her husband, 33-year-old Damian Reed, inside their home on Brook Hollow Drive. The confrontation, reportedly sparked by a social media friend request, escalated from a verbal argument into a violent encounter that ended in tragedy. According to police, the incident began when Reed accessed Wallace's phone and confronted her over a suspicious friend request on her social media account. The conversation grew heated, turning from a verbal exchange into a physical altercation. Wallace later told investigators that she feared for her safety as Reed advanced on her. In response, she retrieved a firearm, initially firing a warning shot. But when Reed allegedly continued to approach, she fired a second round, striking him in the abdomen. After the shooting, Wallace attempted CPR and called 911. Paramedics arrived shortly thereafter, but Reed was pronounced dead at the scene. Jackson police officers took Wallace into custody without incident. She was arrested on a murder charge and booked at the Hinds County Detention Center, where her bond was set at $50,000. Her legal team asserted that she acted in self-defense, citing Reed's aggressive behavior during the argument. This case quickly raised critical questions. Did Wallace act out of fear, or was the response disproportionate? Was the second shot necessary, and did social media fuel a deadly misunderstanding? The shooting occurred around 11:30 a.m. that Sunday. Officers responded to a domestic shooting report at the couple's residence in South Jackson. When they arrived, they discovered Reed unresponsive, suffering from a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Emergency responders tried to revive him, but were unsuccessful. Wallace remained at the scene and cooperated with officers. She was transported to the police station for questioning. Investigators secured the residence and began collecting evidence, documenting the scene, recovering the firearm, and conducting interviews. The home showed no signs of forced entry, and police confirmed that no other adults or children were present during the incident. Neighbors were interviewed, but there were no reports of disturbances leading up to the shooting. Authorities also confirmed that there had been no previous domestic violence calls to the home. Police found a single firearm inside, believed to be the weapon Wallace used. No additional weapons or third-party involvement were discovered, and there was no indication of a prolonged physical struggle beyond what Wallace described. Later that day, Jackson police issued a press release identifying the victim and the accused. They confirmed Wallace's arrest and announced the charge of murder, stating the investigation was ongoing. Officers also collected digital devices and began reviewing surveillance footage from the area to gather more context and verify the sequence of events. The argument reportedly began when Reed accessed Wallace's personal social media profile without her permission. Upon discovering a friend request he found questionable, he confronted her, accusing her of being dishonest or potentially unfaithful. Though the identity behind the friend request remains unknown, it became a source of suspicion and ignited a heated verbal exchange. Wallace told detectives that she attempted to explain the situation, but Reed grew increasingly agitated. According to her account, his tone became louder and his behavior more aggressive. Wallace said she moved to different areas of the house in an effort to avoid further conflict, but Reed continued to follow her. Feeling threatened, Wallace retrieved a firearm from within the home. She claimed she had no intention to use it unless necessary, but simply wanted to protect herself in case Reed became violent. She issued a verbal warning telling him to stop advancing. When he allegedly ignored her warning, Wallace fired a shot into the air in an attempt to deter him. When that didn't stop him, she fired a second time, this time hitting him in the abdomen. Following the shooting, Wallace immediately called for emergency assistance and began life-saving efforts. Authorities confirmed that she performed CPR while awaiting paramedics. Unfortunately, Reed was pronounced dead at the scene, and Wallace was taken into custody shortly after. The central question facing investigators was whether the shooting constituted legitimate self-defense or an excessive response to a domestic argument. Law enforcement explored Wallace's statements carefully, seeking to determine whether she reasonably believed her life was in danger at the time. They also reviewed whether this incident fit a broader pattern of domestic issues between the couple. So far, no prior domestic complaints or police calls involving either party have been found in public records. The friend request and the events that followed became critical in determining motive and intent. While there is no public information about who sent the request or its exact content, it served as the trigger for the confrontation. For investigators and prosecutors, it's more than a minor detail. It represents the spark that ignited the fatal incident. Authorities continued to examine all aspects of the event, including digital communications, past interactions, and the possibility of unreported tension in the relationship. They were also working to determine if Wallace's use of force was legally justified under Mississippi's self-defense laws. Whether the warning shot was sufficient and whether the final shot was avoidable remain at the heart of the case. Wallace's legal team insists that her actions were defensive, taken out of fear during a rapidly escalating domestic encounter. Prosecutors, however, must now weigh whether the threat she faced warranted lethal force and whether a jury would agree with her version of events. As the investigation proceeds, this case raises broader issues about digital privacy, trust in relationships, and how rapidly domestic arguments can turn deadly. It also highlights the fine legal line between self-defense and criminal liability in situations where only two people know what truly happened and only one is left to tell the story. The argument between Rashan Wallace and Damian Reed began as a disagreement and tragically ended in a fatal gunshot. According to reports from the Jackson Police Department, the deadly incident unfolded inside the couple's residence on Brook Hollow Drive during the late morning of February 23, 2025. The dispute reportedly stemmed from a friend request found on Wallace's social media account. Investigators stated that Reed accessed her profile and challenged her about the nature of the request, sparking an intense verbal exchange that quickly escalated. Wallace later told authorities that Reed began yelling and moved toward her in a way she perceived as threatening. Feeling unsafe, she retrieved a legally owned handgun from elsewhere in the home. She stated she warned Reed not to come any closer. Despite her warning, Reed allegedly continued approaching. Wallace then fired what she claimed was a warning shot that did not strike him. However, when he didn't back off, she discharged the weapon again, this time hitting Reed in the abdomen. Wallace immediately dialed emergency services and began performing CPR on her husband while awaiting help. Paramedics arrived shortly after the call, but pronounced 33-year-old Reed dead at the scene due to the gunshot wound. Officers arrived at the residence within minutes of the 911 call. Wallace remained present and did not resist when detained. She provided an account of the events to law enforcement, describing her decisions in sequence, including the discharge of the firearm. Police recovered the weapon near the scene of the shooting. 2 spent shell casings were located and later matched to the handgun found at the residence. Investigators processed the scene thoroughly, documenting it with photographs and collecting ballistic evidence. It was also confirmed that a child was inside the home at the time of the shooting, though they were not near where the incident occurred and were unharmed. Following standard procedure, Child Protective Services was contacted, and the child was placed into temporary protective custody pending further review of the household environment. Wallace was taken into custody and transported to the Hinds County Detention Center. During her initial court appearance, she was formally charged and her bond was set at $50,000. Wallace's 911 call was recorded and a full transcript was entered into evidence, helping to establish a timeline of events. The call log, along with forensic data including blood pattern analysis, bullet trajectory studies, and impact assessment, contributed to law enforcement's ongoing reconstruction of the scene. An autopsy confirmed that Reed died from a single gunshot wound to the abdomen. Toxicology tests were also ordered for both individuals to help investigators better understand any additional factors that may have played a role. Wallace's defense team issued an early statement asserting that her actions were carried out in self-defense. Police officials confirmed her account was being assessed alongside all other evidence gathered at the scene, both physical and digital. As part of the investigation, electronic devices were seized from the residence for forensic examination. Officers aimed to analyze the social media exchange that allegedly triggered the altercation, including message histories, access logs, and any prior communication that may suggest a pattern of tension. Law enforcement also canvassed nearby homes for surveillance footage that might offer additional insight into the moments before and after the shooting. Any available video recordings were collected for further analysis. Although there were no witnesses to the shooting itself, authorities sought to determine whether external cameras had captured useful footage. Damian Reed, age 33, was a resident of Jackson, Mississippi, and lived at the Brook Hollow Drive residence with his wife, Rashawn Wallace. While little information about his profession was made publicly available, investigators confirmed that Reed had no known criminal history or prior run-ins with law enforcement. There were also no formal complaints or domestic violence reports filed against him in connection to his relationship with Wallace. Neighbors described hearing loud arguments on occasion, but reported no major disturbances or reasons to involve police in the past. Reed was reportedly unarmed during the incident, and investigators found no evidence suggesting he had made any physical threats involving a weapon. According to police, he confronted Wallace after discovering a friend request on her social media account, which he interpreted as inappropriate or suspicious. That discovery led to the argument that escalated into the shooting. Reed's movement and behavior during the incident remained a focal point of the investigation, particularly in evaluating the legitimacy of Wallace's self-defense claim. Reed sustained a single gunshot wound to the abdomen and was declared deceased at the scene. Investigators documented the wound thoroughly and ordered an autopsy through the Hinds County Coroner's Office to confirm the precise cause of death and rule out any additional factors. As of the time of reporting, Reed's family had not released any public statements regarding his death. His background, including his career, education, and personal life outside of this incident, was not detailed in early media coverage. No public obituary or funeral arrangements had been reported in the immediate aftermath. However, Reed's name now forms the core of the legal proceedings against his wife. Rashawn Wallace, age 30, worked professionally as a licensed practical nurse in the Jackson area. Public records indicated her nursing license was valid and had no prior disciplinary action. Her employment history revealed a steady career in the medical field, primarily in clinical support roles under the supervision of licensed healthcare professionals. She had no criminal record or history of violent behavior before the events of February 23rd. Wallace and Reed shared a residence on Brook Hollow Drive and were legally married at the time of the incident. There were no reports of separation, divorce proceedings, or restraining orders in place. Though media reports mentioned the presence of a child, police have not confirmed that detail officially. The handgun used in the shooting was legally owned and kept within the home. Wallace told investigators that she initially fired a warning shot and only discharged the firearm a second time when she felt the threat had not diminished. After the fatal shot, she initiated emergency procedures and stayed at the scene until law enforcement arrived. She was arrested without incident and booked into the county detention facility pending further legal proceedings. On the morning of February 23, 2025, Jackson Police Department officers were dispatched to a home on Brook Hollow Drive in response to a domestic shooting. Upon entering the residence, they found 33-year-old Damian Reed lying unresponsive with a gunshot wound to his abdomen. His wife, 30-year-old Rashawn Wallace, remained at the scene and informed police she had fired the weapon during a dispute between the two. Wallace voluntarily provided a statement explaining that she had fired 2 rounds during the argument, one as a warning shot and the second, which struck Reed, as a reaction to what she described as a threatening advance. The dispute had reportedly been sparked by Reed confronting Wallace about a friend request he had seen on one of her social media profiles. Officers collected physical evidence from the scene, including the firearm Wallace admitted to using, and arrested her at the location. She was transported to the Hinds County Detention Center and formally charged with murder. During her bond hearing, prosecutors requested that she either be held without bail or assigned a high bond due to the nature of the charge. The presiding judge ultimately set her bond at $50,000. Wallace later posted bond and was released under standard pretrial monitoring. Authorities confirmed that a child was present inside the home during the shooting. The Department of Human Services was notified and took immediate steps to ensure the child's safety, placing them in temporary care while legal proceedings unfolded. As the case moved forward, investigators continued to build their case, gathering digital communications, conducting forensic testing, and interviewing potential witnesses. Wallace's legal team promptly filed motions indicating their intent to invoke Mississippi's self-defense laws. The case was assigned to a circuit court judge and moved into the pretrial phase, which includes an evidentiary hearing to determine whether there is sufficient basis for the case to proceed to trial. Both legal sides began preparing arguments, particularly centered on how state law defines the acceptable use of deadly force in domestic disputes. The fatal shooting took place inside the master bedroom of the couple's Brook Hollow residence. According to police reports, the gun used in the incident was a registered handgun belonging to Wallace. It was recovered from the bedroom floor, positioned near the foot of the bed. 2 bullets had been fired. One bullet was later found lodged in the east-facing wall of the room, while the other struck Reed in the lower abdomen. Ballistics analysis confirmed that both rounds were discharged from the same firearm. Shell casings were discovered close together on the carpet, about 5 feet from where the weapon had been located. Blood pooled near Reed's body, and minor signs of disturbance were evident in the room, including an overturned chair and lamp. However, no furniture was broken, and there were no signs of a prolonged struggle, suggesting the confrontation was brief and largely confined to one section of the room. Law enforcement used laser-based tools to map the trajectory of the fatal shot, which reportedly traveled in an upward direction, entering Reed from below. This supported Wallace's claim that she had been seated or kneeling when she fired the fatal round. The other shot traveled horizontally and struck the wall, consistent with her statement that the first discharge was meant as a deterrent. No other weapons were discovered in the residence. Reed was found to be unarmed, and no indications of him attempting to grab a weapon were observed. The home lacked internal surveillance systems, and although surrounding residences had exterior security cameras, no footage was recovered that captured activity relevant to the incident. The couple's child was confirmed to have been home during the shooting, though in a separate room and not exposed to the incident. Wallace reportedly stayed at the scene after the shooting and made the 911 call herself. The emergency call log showed that she followed dispatcher instructions and attempted CPR before paramedics arrived. Reed was pronounced dead at the scene shortly after first responders arrived. Forensic specialists gathered a wide array of evidence from the bedroom. This included the weapon, spent shell casings, bullet fragments, swabs of blood and bodily fluids, clothing worn by both parties, and fingerprints from various surfaces. All collected materials were turned over to the Mississippi State Crime Lab for processing. Officers also used body-worn cameras and official photography to log and preserve all physical evidence. Wallace's defense maintains that her use of deadly force was a direct response to an escalating threat and was carried out by Mississippi's self-defense and Castle Doctrine statutes. She insists that she did not intend to kill Reed, but instead attempted to prevent harm to herself. Her attorneys argue that Wallace fired the first shot into the wall specifically as a non-lethal warning and only resorted to a second shot when Reed, in her account, continued advancing toward her. They also highlight that she contacted emergency services immediately after the shooting and tried to save her husband's life, which they claim points to the absence of malicious intent. Her legal representation plans to argue that her actions were within the legal rights afforded to her under Mississippi's justifiable homicide law, which allows the use of deadly force inside one's home if the person believes they are in imminent danger of serious harm or death. No physical injuries to Wallace were publicly disclosed, and authorities have not released any evidence suggesting third-party witnesses observed the shooting. Much of the upcoming legal analysis is expected to focus on forensic factors such as bullet trajectory, proximity between Wallace and Reed, and the timing of the shots to assess whether Wallace's self-defense claim holds legal merit. In the days following the shooting, the Hinds County District Attorney's Office officially filed a murder charge against Rashawn Wallace. Prosecutors said the charge was based on available evidence and Wallace's admission in the 911 call. According to the DA's statement, the facts presented so far did not meet the strict criteria required for a lawful self-defense claim. Under Mississippi law, the use of lethal force must be deemed necessary, with no reasonable alternative for avoiding the threat. The person claiming self-defense must demonstrate they were facing an immediate and credible danger that justified their actions. Prosecutors argued that, based on initial findings, the situation did not reflect the type of imminent threat typically required to excuse a fatal response under those guidelines. At Rashawn Wallace's first court hearing, prosecutors presented a summary outlining the events surrounding the death of her husband, Damian Reed. The report included autopsy confirmation of the fatal gunshot wound and a timeline of the incident. While prosecutors acknowledged Wallace's cooperation and lack of criminal history, they argued those factors alone didn't warrant leniency. The district attorney's office maintained that the charge of murder should stand pending a full evidentiary hearing. The investigation remains active, focusing on forensic validation, digital communications between the couple, and social media activity. Prosecutors emphasized that under Mississippi law, firing a warning shot doesn't automatically justify deadly force unless strict criteria for self-defense are met. Although Wallace's legal team suggested the incident might fall under the state's Stand Your Ground law, the DA's office stressed that such claims must be assessed in court with full evidence. A probable cause hearing was scheduled to determine whether the case should proceed to trial. Both sides are expected to present supporting materials, including digital data, forensic evidence, and any available witness statements. Investigators are also reviewing whether Wallace had any injuries consistent with defensive action and are analyzing photos and medical reports collected at the scene. The aftermath of the shooting stirred strong reactions from both families and the local community. Neighbors described the couple as quiet and kept to themselves. There were no known signs of trouble before the incident. Damian Reed's family expressed surprise and concern, questioning the decision to grant bond and urging a thorough investigation. Supporters of Wallace pointed to her background in healthcare, clean record, and her actions after the shooting, calling 911 and performing CPR, as indicators that the shooting may not have been intentional. Online conversations around the case quickly grew, with the public split between those who believed Wallace acted out of fear and others who viewed the response as disproportionate. Domestic violence experts used the incident to highlight growing cases where digital interactions, such as suspicious messages or social media activity, escalate into violence. Mississippi continues to rank high in domestic-related firearm deaths. That brings us to the end of today's case. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. For more powerful true crime narratives, explore our curated playlist, linked in the description. At True Crimes Venue, our mission is to bring critical stories to light and honor every voice behind them. Until next time, stay informed, stay safe, and remember, justice begins with truth.